So the Stranger Things finale finally happened, and everyone wants to know the same thing. Is 11 actually dead, or is she still out there somewhere? The Duffers left it open on purpose, and that decision has been driving fans crazy since the episode dropped. After watching this finale multiple times, something became clear. Each rewatch revealed new details that shifted how the ending actually works. Here is the thing. The Duffers did not accidentally leave this ambiguous. They buried the answer in the details, and once you see the pattern, it is impossible to unsee. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what happened to 11. But first, there is one thing you need to know. A lot of crucial backstory for this finale actually comes from a stage production called First Shadow that most viewers have never seen. We are going to fill in those gaps as we go because, without that context, some of these scenes will not make sense. There is a stage production called First Shadow that fills in major gaps about Brenner and Henry Creel, and honestly, some of this information is essential for understanding the finale. Here is what matters. Decades before the events of the show, there was a secretive government program experimenting with ways to tear through the barrier between dimensions. Brenner's parents were involved in this program, and they disappeared during one of the operations. He never found out what happened to them, and that loss shaped everything he did afterwards. His entire career at Hawkins' lab was secretly an attempt to reopen those pathways and find his parents.
You are the monster.
The Mind Flayer sensed this desperation in him and spent years whispering to his ambitions. It never possessed him the way it did with Henry. There was no physical invasion. It just nudged his research in directions that served its own agenda. Brenner thought he was chasing answers about his family, but every step brought the Mind Flayer closer to breaking through. He was being used the whole time and never realized it. The other important detail involves Joyce. Back in high school, she performed in a theater production where she held an axe during one of the scenes. Henry Creel acted in that same play, standing on the same stage with her. Hopper went to that school too and knew Henry back then. Keep this in mind because it pays off in a major way during the finale. Now let us get into the actual episode. One of the biggest questions going into this finale was why Vecna needed exactly 12 kids. The show leaves some gaps, but there is enough scattered throughout to piece together an explanation. The Mind Flayer on its own could not generate enough force to tear through the barriers separating dimensions. Bonding with Henry Creel gave it a foothold in a human host, but that was only a partial solution. Taking 11's abilities later added more fuel, but even that combination fell short. The creature needed a larger pool of psychic power drawn from multiple minds working together. 12 gifted children, each contributing their mental energy, would finally tip the scales. Brenner spent years running experiments with this number as his target. Countless kids passed through his facility, and most did not survive the process. He was filtering through subjects ruthlessly until he isolated the strongest candidates. The unsettling part is that Brenner may not have arrived at this number through his own reasoning. The Mind Flayer had been nudging him toward decisions that served its agenda the whole time. The number 12 also works on a symbolic level. Listen to the opening of this episode and you will hear the sound of a clock which connects to the 12 positions on its face. There is also a religious dimension to how Vecna stages himself surrounded by these children. The visual echoes classical paintings of Christ seated among his 12 disciples at the Last Supper. Vecna positions himself as a corrupted Messiah figure which fits his whole complex throughout the season. With that context in place, let us talk about the tank scene. The tank scene brings us into some of the deepest mythology the show has to offer, so let me break down what is actually going on here. 11 needs to use the sensory deprivation tank inside the upside-down version of Hawkins' lab. This location puts her as close as possible to where the Mind Flayer and Vecna are physically located. She needs that proximity to establish a strong enough psychic connection to take them on. Now here is something that bugged me a little. The tank is filled with water, but if you look around the rest of the Upside Down, everything is bone dry. Dusty, decayed buildings and organic vines everywhere, but no bodies of water in sight. The honest answer is probably that the story required it, and the writers did not feel the need to explain the logistics. Once we move past the tank setup, we get a really striking visual of Vecna suspended inside the Mind Flayer itself. This confirms what fans suspected about the substance Vecna was feeding to those captured kids. The dark liquid flowing through those tubes was not random. It was pieces of the Mind Flayer being transferred into their bodies. What makes this scene significant is how it visualizes the bond between these two villains. You can actually see the Mind Flayer's heart pulsing directly above Vecna's position, and the imagery is genuinely unsettling. Vecna explains how the two of them merged into a single consciousness over time. They share thoughts and physical sensation now. Any injury to the Mind Flayer registers as pain for Vecna, and vice versa. Taking down one means taking down both. Remember this because it becomes critical later. We get a flashback that takes us back to a defining moment from Eleven's childhood. This is when Brenner instructed her to enter the sensory deprivation state and reach across the void to touch whatever was waiting on the other side.
Daughter. And Papa.
She had no idea that making this connection would tear open a passage between worlds. To her, it was just another test in a lifetime of tests. Brenner understood the full scope of what he was orchestrating, and he let her do it anyway, knowing full well what it could unleash. This is where things get frustrating from a storytelling perspective. A significant amount of background information about Brenner exists outside of the show entirely. As I mentioned earlier, the first Shadow Stage production explains his true motivations, the missing parents, the Mind Flayer whispering to his ambitions, all of it. If you have not seen that production, you are left guessing at details that really matter for understanding why he let Eleven open that gate in the first place. He was a pawn who thought he was the player. Before everything goes down, we get a few important character moments worth talking about. Hopper pulls Eleven aside and asks her to give him her word that she will not do anything reckless when the moment comes. He needs to hear her say that if the situation falls apart, they will pull back and regroup instead of pushing forward into certain death. This exchange carries extra weight when you remember that Hopper has not exactly been honest with her either.
I know it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I'm here.
Throughout the previous months, he kept saying she could join him on operations, and then consistently found reasons to leave her behind. Neither of them has a clean record when it comes to keeping promises. Murray gets a light moment where he compares Eleven to Kara Zor-El, which feels timely since we have a film about that character coming to theaters soon. Later in the episode, Dustin throws out a nod to the Man of Steel as well. The writers clearly had fun weaving in these comic book connections throughout the finale. Then there is the conversation between Will and Mike up on the tower.
Well, it didn't hurt that Mom scared off that demo. It saved Robin's life. Everybody's life.
This scene addresses the unresolved tension from the previous season when Will was vulnerable about his emotions, and Mike completely fumbled the response. By this point in the story, Will has worked through those feelings and found peace with where things stand. The Duffers mention that during the time jump, Will had space to grow and explore connections with other people. And this scene where Max suddenly stands up and starts walking threw me off at first because her body should not be capable of that anymore. The explanation is that Eleven and Kaylee have pulled her consciousness into a shared mental space where physical limitations do not apply. Inside this psychic realm, the three of them are whole and capable of moving freely. Their mission is to pursue Vecna into the deepest layers of his own mind and confront him there. The first location they find themselves in is a memory from Henry Creel's teenage years. This is the high school before Joyce put on her theater production, and the details are surprisingly rich. You can spot Steve Harrington's father in the crowd, and young Joyce appears as well with casting that genuinely resembles Winona Ryder at that age.
Joyce! Is that stupid play of yours?
Better see you there, Harrington.
We also catch a glimpse of teenage Hopper hanging around in the background while Ted Wheeler is already making his moves on Karen. It is a nice touch seeing all these characters before life got complicated. From there, they travel into the next memory, which is Joyce's actual play. This connects directly to the first Shadow Stage production where audiences saw this performance unfold in full. Henry Creel had a role in that very performance, which creates an eerie layer knowing what he eventually becomes. The group cannot move forward immediately because the passage to the next location only becomes accessible at a precise moment tied to the memory itself. They make it through to Creel House, where they work on freeing the captured kids by exposing Vecna for what he truly is. Once the children see the monster behind the mask, his hold over them starts to break. The show draws a comparison to A Wrinkle in Time, here connecting the dark force they are fighting to the shadow entity from that story. Just when it seems like they have Vecna cornered, Kali moves in to finish him, but he vanishes before she can land the blow. Inside his own memories, he operates with almost unlimited control over space and time and can reshape reality whenever he chooses, which makes him nearly impossible to pin down. When the other group enters the abyss, they immediately notice something strange. There are no demogorgons anywhere and no signs of organic life at all. Every living thing that once existed in this dimension has been absorbed into the Mind Flayer's massive body. This entity exists for one purpose, and that is to swallow entire worlds and add them to itself. It is a parasite on a cosmic scale. Steve has a small moment here where he makes a comment to Jonathan about nuggets, which might seem throwaway, but it actually sets up his future, since by the end of the episode we see he ended up working with young people for a living. Then we get a tense sequence where Vecna starts messing with Hopper's perception. He makes Hopper believe that he is firing his weapon at Eleven and that he has actually shot her. The panic feels real, but when Eleven emerges from the water, her body shows no signs of injury. Vecna warped what Hopper was experiencing to get him to physically remove her from the tank and interrupt her focus. It is a clever move that shows how dangerous Vecna can be without lifting a finger. Around this time, Eleven has a difficult exchange with both Kaylee and Hopper about what she intends to do. She seems prepared for the possibility that she might not make it out, but she is not fully committed to sacrificing herself either. What frustrates her is that Kaylee has clearly already made peace with dying, and Eleven is not ready to accept that. Vecna eventually manages to confront the fears that have held him back and follows the kids into the underground passages. The Mind Flayer had been keeping certain doors in his memory locked because full awareness of their bond could have led him to resist its control. The Duffers mentioned they considered a version where Henry turns against the Mind Flayer in the final act, but the runtime could not support another major character shift. This is when Will steps into the heart of the hive and forms a direct link with Henry's consciousness.
You're just like me, Henry.
That connection unlocks buried history from decades earlier. We see a scientist whose team had reached across the boundary between worlds, and a piece of the Mind Flayer slipped through during that breach. This scientist recognized the danger and tried to remove the fragment before it could spread further. That effort collapsed when a young Henry Creel wandered into his path by chance. Henry found the container holding the fragment and opened it without understanding what was inside. The Mind Flayer merged with his consciousness and settled into his thoughts like a second voice guiding him from within. His behavior shifted almost overnight, and his family relocated to Hawkins, believing a change of scenery might help. Instead, that move planted the seeds for everything that followed. The military intercepts the group and opens fire. Kaylee gets hit with a gunshot to her midsection but stays conscious long enough to have a final moment with Eleven. She is wounded but still breathing.
My story was always going to end here.
And that matters because she has one more move left to make. She makes something clear in that exchange. This ending belongs to her alone, and the others, including Eleven, still have roads left to travel. It is a goodbye, but also a push forward. We finally see the Mind Flayer in full, and it takes the shape of an enormous arachnid creature. Some viewers expected something closer to the multi-headed beast Will painted for Mike several seasons back. That artwork shows up briefly in Mike's bedroom during the closing scenes, but the final design went in a more visceral direction. Bringing down both villains requires coordination from the entire group. Will draws on the residual connection left inside him from years of psychic entanglement and uses it to weaken Vecna from within. Eleven strikes alongside him, but the decisive blow comes from Joyce. She grabs a hand axe and puts everything into finishing him off. The blade is worn and blunt, so each strike takes effort, and the process drags on longer than expected. There is nothing cinematic about it, just raw exhaustion and determination. This moment connects back to the first Shadow Stage production. In high school, Joyce performed in a play where she held a similar weapon during one of the scenes. Henry Creel acted in that same show, standing on the same stage with her. Decades later, she ends his life without any flicker of recognition. Hopper attended that school too and knew Henry back then, but he never makes the connection either. After the final strike, Vecna stops moving and the Mind Flayer begins collapsing alongside him. The shot lingers on what remains of his head, confirming this death is final. One question remains, though. We never see any sign that Mind Flayer traces in other characters were expelled when the Source died. The group makes it back through the gate into the regular dimension, with Prince playing on the soundtrack and the military waiting on the other side. Here is the critical detail. They have sonic blocking technology active, which means the moment 11 crosses over, she loses access to her abilities completely. They pull open the truck and 11 is standing there in full view of every soldier and Dr. Owens with weapons trained on her. She steps down and guards grab hold of her. Then something strange happens. Dr. Owens' expression shifts into confusion and 11 vanishes right in front of everyone. Now think about this logically. The gate is far behind them across open ground. 11 has no powers because of the signal disruptors. There is no version of events where she sprints that distance in plain sight without someone stopping her. It does not add up unless you consider one possibility. Kaylee. Kaylee's ability is projecting false images into people's minds. What if she used her power one last time to make the military believe they were watching 11 run toward the gate when she had already slipped past them in another direction? That explains the confusion on Dr. Owens' face. That explains how 11 vanished without a trace. The soldiers were shooting at nothing. Mike gets pulled into a mental conversation with 11 where she talks about her choice and asks him to carry her story forward. A lot of viewers took this as proof she was dying, but here is the thing. That psychic conversation works no matter where she physically is, as long as she moved beyond the range of those signal disruptors. It is not a death scene. It is a goodbye for now scene. The exotic matter detonates and we watch 11 walking into the collapsing chaos with purple rain playing underneath. On the surface, it reads like a death scene, but pay attention. No debris makes contact with her body. Then, after the gate seals and the screen cuts to black, her heartbeat continues on the audio track. It does not fade before the portal closes. It keeps going. So here is what I believe actually happened. 11 did not die. Kaylee used her final illusion to cover 11's escape. The continuing heartbeat confirms she survived the collapse. And the Duffers told us all of this without ever saying the words directly. They buried the answer in the details for people paying close attention. But I have more evidence. Let me show you what happens in the time jump. We skip ahead 18 months and find ourselves in 1989 with the main characters collecting their diplomas. The official story blames the destruction of Hawkins on seismic activity, and everyone outside the inner circle accepts that explanation. Now here is a detail that confirms everything I just said about 11 surviving. There is footage in this finale shot on location in Iceland at a spot featuring 3 waterfalls. This ties directly to an earlier conversation where Hopper described wanting to settle somewhere peaceful with exactly that kind of scenery. Think about what this means from a production standpoint. Transporting cast and crew overseas for a single sequence costs serious money. If 11 is truly dead, why spend that budget? A digital backdrop would have been cheaper. Cutting the scene entirely would have been the practical choice. They went to Iceland because that location matters, because 11 is actually there. She made it to the place Hopper always dreamed about. At the graduation ceremony, something clicks for Mike when audio interference cuts through the speakers. That sound triggers a realization about the night at the gate. With signal disruptors running, 11 had no way to use her abilities. Whatever the soldiers witnessed could not have been her. The only explanation is Kaylee projecting a false version of events. Then there is the David Bowie detail that seals it for me. Heroes plays over the end credits. This song has appeared twice before in the series. Once when Will's fake body was found and everyone believed he was gone even though he survived. Again when Hopper appeared to die in the Season 3 finale but was actually locked in a Russian prison. Both times, the song scored a fake death. Using it a third time for 11 is not a coincidence. The Duffers are telling us directly that this follows the same pattern. We see in the final stretch that Mike pursued writing and transformed everything the group experienced into stories. A framed photo of 11 rests near his workspace. The last image reveals a tabletop gaming sourcebook titled Stranger Things, presenting all of it as a campaign built from memory. What happened was real, and Mike found a way to make sure it would never be forgotten. So why did the Duffers leave the ending open instead of just confirming 11 survived? I think there are two reasons. The first is storytelling. 11 choosing to walk away from her old life carries more emotional weight than a clean, happy ending. She gave everyone closure while finding peace for herself. Spelling that out explicitly would have cheapened the moment. The second reason is business. When the Duffers created Stranger Things, they never planned for it to go this long. The original idea was a single-season story. Then Netflix saw the numbers and suddenly wanted more. Now they have already confirmed a spin-off is coming with new characters in a different setting. They want this franchise running for years, and leaving 11 alive keeps options open. The Duffers have talked about bringing the original cast back for some kind of reunion project down the road. You do not plan reunion content for a character you killed off. Millie Bobby Brown returning in 5 or 10 years makes too much sense for Netflix to close that door permanently. The evidence in the finale itself tells the story, the continuing heartbeat, the Iceland footage, the David Bowie pattern, Kaylee's illusion abilities. None of this is accidental. The Duffers gave us the answer. They just trusted the audience to find it. 11 is alive. She made it out. And somewhere in a place with 3 waterfalls, she finally found the peace she was looking for.